Hello, uh, welcome to our webinar. I'm Andrew. We'll do introductions in a second, but today we've got part 2 of our Logic Apps Ultimate Logic Apps Best Practices Guide, and today we're going to talk about all the operational aspects of supporting Logic Apps and other integration technologies. This is brought to you by Microsoft and 345 Technology. Let me just quickly get onto our agenda, but if you're wondering whether this is the webinar for you, we're going to talk mostly about technical stuff. So, yeah, but if you're a technology decision maker, you're an architect, CTO, this is for you. If you're an Azure developer, you'll also get a lot out of this. If you are just wondering whether Logic Apps have got a return on investment, and you're a business decision maker, maybe not the time, maybe not the place, but certainly anyone that needs to run integration in Azure, this is definitely for you. Right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to do introductions, then we're going to look at the problem space as a whole. We're then going to look at a deep dive into some of the best practices, and then we're going to do a brilliant demo to actually bring all this stuff to life. And then later on, we are going to actually spend a bit of time doing Q&A. Hopefully we'll have time for that. So in the comments on StreamYard, please leave questions, comments, and we'll get round to those at the end. Now, what we'd also like is if you could join us on Slido. So if you could just scan this QR code or join slido.com on your PC at that hash code. There's a couple of points in here where we'd like to get your participation. So you could also leave questions or comments for us on Slido as well. So it'd be great to see you over there. Right, so with us, we've got Dave Phelps, who's Senior Cloud Solution Architect, Microsoft in the UK, and Dave is the go-to guy for integration in the UK. So, and possibly worldwide, Dave. But there is nothing that Dave doesn't know about integration on Azure. And as for me, I'm Andrew Rivers. I'm the CEO of 345 Technology, and I'll tell you a little bit about us as well. So, 345 Technology, we're the #1 integration partner in Azure. We are the complete solution lifecycle. So not only do we help you with imagining your solution, but we design, build, and we support it. We also provide the biggest UK-based practice, so just focused on integration. And we also bring with us our own Rapid Start toolkit so that we can put an Azure integration footprint into your business in record time, allowing you to deliver value quickly and cheaply. So that's 345 Technology in a nutshell. One other thing I just want to bring to your attention is that we are sponsoring, we are a platinum sponsor of Integrate 2024, which is in June, so just under 2 months' time. So if you want to find out more about this whole topic, come to the conference, come and find us, and we can have a chat about that. So I've just got a request on the side there to drop the Slido ID into the chat. So Jem, if you could do that. Oh, there we go. We've got that. We've got that in hand. Great stuff. So in this series of webinars, the first one we did last time was all around performance. That was a massive topic. We hopefully got a lot out of that. Today we're going to talk about operations, but there's still plenty of other things to go, including security, the whole DevOps application lifecycle management piece, and also the FinOps piece. So plenty more to come, but today we're focusing on operations. So let's start with the problem space. So generally, well, first of all, if we could this is why we need you on Slido. So please put in, if you can, what's your main operational challenge with Azure integration? I'd love to know what it is you're finding hard. So don't be shy. There we go. What you've got to do is get your phone, open QR code, and then put in and give us your feedback on that. So let's just give you a that's it. We'll just give you a couple of moments to keep going here. Just if you go to slido.com 9607-324 and take part in the oh, this is shaping up. Good stuff. Yeah, a couple of things: understanding pricing, choosing the right component. That's great stuff. Oh, replaying messages. Yeah, another pricing one. Cost management. We've still got some people typing. This is good stuff. Thanks everyone for keeping going in here. So we will be picking up some of these themes, and some of the other ones we will actually come in as part of the as part of this series. We've still got some more things coming in. Monitoring and cost. Well, if you want monitoring and cost management, you're definitely in the right place. So there's another interesting one, actually, out of the box monitoring. We'll get onto that as well, because a lot of this stuff is almost out of the box, but you still need to do the last bit yourself. We've got tracking in there. There's a BAM, which I think is a BAM, but with a slight typo. Learning resources. Okay, really appreciate your participation. We're going to bring this to a close in 10 seconds. So if you're the one that's still typing, let's get this over the line now. So there's definitely a bit of scaling there. That's interesting. We'll pick up on that. We'll pick up on that later. And then right, this is great stuff. Let's move on and have a look at the problem space. So really, when we're looking at the operational management, I mean the things really that we're looking at is you want to be able to diagnose faults quickly. You want to be able to diagnose things accurately. You want to be able to make the right people aware of problems. There's the whole thing of identifying and monitoring trends, and also you want to predict issues and you want to take preventative actions, and also all those things about what's going on and what do I do about it, and then making sure that the right people can do the right things at the right time. So some of the factors for success. So when you've got an integration estate in Azure, some of the things you need to think about is you need to ensure that you've got the information you need by capturing your diagnostics, and it's not just raw diagnostics data, but it's how the diagnostics and your business data interplay, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. You need to know when something important's happened, and that is the whole thing of monitoring and alerting. And then it's like, how do we surface that? How do we make everything visible so that the people that are the operators know what's going on? So that's where we'll look at dashboards and we'll look at workbooks. Okay, so let's dive straight in then. So one of the things we'll talk about is some of the things you've been missing, and then some of the best practices. So if we're talking about Logic Apps have a run history, so that might give you the information you need. But if you're decided for performance reasons that they're going to be stateless, then we don't get that, but you do get App Insights. Dave, is there anything else? Do you have any other thoughts on that you want to add into there?
Yeah, the point about stateless workflows, I think, is a really important one. You can enable debugging, which does enable run history for stateless workflows, but obviously there is an impact for doing that, hence it's a debugging facility. But if you have App Insights enabled, and we'll get into a lot more detail on this later, then you can actually track what's happening within those stateless workflows. So it is possible to get visibility of what's happening inside them.
Okay, and one of the other things here is actually, out of the box, your login might be set to be particularly verbose, but actually we can control that as well. I think we might talk about that a little bit more later, but definitely, you don't have to capture everything. And there's a whole lot of strategies that you can do there. We'll talk about that, but also, and this is one of the things I think that's a big thing is to be able to, is ultimately, a Logic app or an Azure function or an API management. These things don't exist in isolation. We build up a solution with multiple pieces, and it's like how you correlate between them. So, I mean, that's something that, if you find that you aren't able to link all these different things together, then you'll get something out of this webinar, because one of the things that is really important is when you're providing a business service, that all the different bits that interact and make that whole service. So some of the best practices here, that if you want to, you can reduce the scale of your login through sampling if you don't need it all, and we will dive into that in a bit more detail. There's also how you can structure your App Insights, and because you don't just have to have one, you can have multiple App Insight stores, and then you can configure those. Is there anything else on configuring App Insights that you want to that you feel needs to be just highlighted to everyone, Dave?
Yeah, I think the point about the correlation is really important, because as you said at the start, Logic Apps don't exist in isolation. So if we have API management, some function apps, maybe they're chained together over queues, for example, using service bus, then it becomes really important to be able to understand what that end-to-end view looks like. And that's where App Insights is particularly useful, because it does have that built-in correlation that would flow, for example, from API management through to your Logic app and then through to a function over a queue. And we'll give this demo later on. But the sampling point is also really important. And by default, if you look at the data that gets logged, there's quite a lot that goes into the traces table, for example, in App Insights, but you can turn on sampling to reduce that. And one thing that I think maybe not fully understood sometimes is that if you have an integration where you've got App Insights being used by multiple different services, you can enable sampling at different rates for the different services. So one could be extremely noisy, in which case you could sample most of that data out, but the correlation token still flows, even though sampling's turned on. So you can actually have a chain of services with completely different levels of sampling, as is appropriate for your application.
Yeah, so things that are particularly, things that are particularly noisy, but also if they're noisy and fairly stable, you can just use sampling and just get the statistical performance on that, and then you don't need absolutely every single line every time. Okay, and one of the other things on here is just ultimately it's making sure that when if you're passing correlation or something like that, or you want to type it, correlation ties things together. But the other thing you want to do is to actually tie the diagnostics back to some business data. So for example, I think the example we've got a bit later on is about order processing. But if someone's requesting support and all they've got is their order ID, it's how do you find the trace of that based on the business data, not how do I just get a load of technical data together, but it's how do I tie that back to business. So that is a really important factor. Okay, we've got a slight error with the animation on here. Don't worry about that. So in terms of Logic Apps, if we're logging custom data, we can use the track properties, and we can use the compose action to create our payload. So what's the sort of best thing to do here, Dave, and why would you use one or the other or both? I mean, what's the kind of the insights we can give there?
Yeah, no pun intended. Track properties are really useful because they do allow you to log additional data that could be of use to support, for example, as Andrew said, like an order ID. But track properties can track two things. They can track the payload that comes into the trigger, or they can track the input and output of the action. So if you think of a SQL call, you might be taking part of the payload and sending that to SQL. You might be getting some kind of result back. So with track properties, you can track both of those. You can track the input and the output. But if you wanted to create something completely custom and you wanted to log a JSON payload, for example, that contains some data from the payload, some data from a SQL action, some from a bunch of other actions, then that's where Compose is really handy, because you can create your payload that you want tracked, then you go to track properties and just track the output. And then that entire payload gets written to application insights for you to then go and query as you want to. So I think it's really about thinking where the data is that you're after. And if it's available in the action or in the request, then you can just go and log that straight away. But if you want something more custom, then Compose is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, that's a really handy hint for it, because you may not know that, but it's just getting that data, just getting that data into App Insights is just so useful later on when because you can't look at it later if it's not stored. Okay, just moving on to API management. I mean, we can then there's a whole load of other tracing in there. So I know the title of the presentation is all about Logic Apps best practices, but we so often use Logic Apps API management, Service Bus, and Azure Functions together as a tool set that this really does need to come in. So what might we say about setting up the tracing in API management? Because I think most people are kind of look at API management and say, okay, I've got my APIs there. I'm managing the security of them. I'm using that as a way to discover APIs, but not a lot. A lot of people may not think about API management as a means of tracking.
Yeah, in APIM you can configure multiple application insights instances, so that you can have different instances on different APIs, which may make sense from a throttling perspective or cost perspective. But the API management will then flow that correlation token that I mentioned earlier to the back end, whatever that back end might be, which is really useful. But you could also track the request, response payload, and custom payload. So the trace policy that you can use in API management allows you to effectively create your own payload. So the only thing I'd say is you just need to be a bit careful of tracking the payload in API management if it is under very high load. Just make sure that the performance is as you want it to be. But it's a really great way of being able to track that request or the response payload directly from your API, which if your back end isn't able to do that, for example, that's particularly useful.
Yes, and certainly when we've been supporting customers with live systems, the ability to actually know what requests have been received and what was in them is an essential thing, because yes, you've got like two systems removed, and then the bit in the middle, which is the integration, always gets blamed. But actually, when you can actually say to them, yes, I've received it, no, I haven't received it, I've received this data, and use that as part of your fault finding, it's just absolutely invaluable. And it's so hard to do fault finding if you actually can't, if you haven't got that tracking or that logging at the point of ingress into your whole environment. So that's a really valuable place to set that up. I mean, the last thing we've got here is really about functions, and effectively, because functions are code, ultimately, you just got to put in, put in the code to whatever it is you want to track, because functions aren't magically going to know what you need to log. But are there any particular best practices or anything like that people should be thinking of if they're doing functions?
Well, I think the obvious one is to enable App Insights, and the way that you enable it in functions and Logic Apps standard anyway is exactly the same. You just need to go and add the App Insights connection string into your app settings, and then it's automatic, and you'll get the entries written into App Insights with the request table, the exceptions if anything fails within your function, but also tracking custom data is super easy. Just one line of code, and you can track pieces of data from the payload. And as we'll show later, this becomes really important when you have a business process where a request is received, but different bits of the business process have a job, and they have access to different pieces of data that you might want to log that could be incredibly useful. So adding App Insights and tracking that custom data where appropriate really makes sense. The other thing you can do, of course, with App Insights is through live metrics, which I'll touch on later, but you can see in real time how your app is scaling out as well. And that can be particularly useful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to move us on now to the alerting side of it. So, because ultimately, you set up Azure Monitor to configure alerts, but some of the things that you might want to alert on are obviously if something's taken too long. In other words, if you've got performance issues because something is not responsive enough, we can set up that kind of alert. If actually you haven't heard of something for a while and you're wondering whether it's available, we can set up those kind of alerts. Obviously, you might want to know if a particular error has happened, but very often we get errors, and and we're not as worried about an individual error, but we might be worried about the rate at which we're getting errors. If we're getting more than so many in a certain time, then that might be more symptomatic of something else happening. So we can always get a network blip, but actually, if you're getting particular clusters of errors in a certain period of time, that's much more indicative of certain issues happening. But then there's also business alerts. So given the fact that we've already mentioned about the fact we can capture different bits of business data, so we can if there is if an order has been received but hasn't been dispatched within a certain time period, we can create those sort of alerts. So there's a lot of richness in this, and I know we're going to get onto that in the demo, Dave. But if you have any other thoughts on this that you might want to add before we kind of just go a little bit more into the alerts best practice. Oh, Dave, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying that alerts really, and monitoring actually, need to be a first-class citizen during the development process and not an afterthought. And alerts are only useful if they're alerting on the right thing. And some of the things on the screen there are really great examples of things that you might want to alert on. But I think the one at the bottom for me is a really important one, because your process may actually take seconds, minutes, hours, days to complete, and being able to generate an alert if that process isn't completing, I think is invaluable. But also the idea of being able to look at groups of errors together, and maybe the odd one possibly is okay, maybe something's recovering over time due to retries, but if you could then say, well, if I have this many failures from this many instances that are running, then I would like to generate an alert. So what I would say is think about this up front and early. Don't leave it to the last minute, because you need the right data logged, and you need to really think about and work with the business to understand what those processes are and what would be important to know.
Well, yeah, because that's right, because it's ultimately we're designing business processes, and then there's an element of what's the service design on that, and what happens when that service goes wrong, and those are the sort of questions that if you look at it purely from how am I delivering a service to my business, you arrive at a whole different set of requirements than you might get from purely looking at dev from a functional perspective, because the functional perspective is going to be what should my business process do, rather than what do I need to know if it goes wrong. So and that, like you say, that needs to be designed in. There's a certain amount we can do afterwards, but if we haven't thought about it in advance and not captured the right stuff, then we're going to be stuck. We've just got a couple of other things on alerts, really. So one of the things that's actually useful to think about is that, because particularly in Logic Apps, it's really easy to have retries, so that you can set up automated retries, and an application may self-heal. And it's only if you exhaust your retries that you go into a dead letter queue and that sort of thing. So you don't necessarily have to alert when something goes wrong, but it's when it continually goes wrong to the point of which so really it's when someone needs to do something that you need to alert. And I think that's perhaps some of the difference between diagnostic dashboards. Most workbooks will kind of explore these a little bit, but it's alerts of when someone needs to do something, rather than dashboards of when you need to look at stuff, and then and which actually brings us on to dashboards and workbooks now. So just tell us a little bit, Dave, about when you use dashboards and what sort of things you put in them.
Yeah, dashboards are incredibly useful, because you can, if you think of Azure Monitor, for example, there are various things out of the box that you can pin to a dashboard that could then be shared to other people in your organization. But I think where the power really comes in is when, based on all of the data that we've been talking about and how important it is to log the data that you're interested in, whether it's the time that an order is received or completed or something gets delivered, that information could be incredibly useful to have as a chart or a table or something that you could then pin to a dashboard that's going to auto refresh. And these are Azure dashboards available in the Azure portal. So you can just go and pin those queries to that dashboard. Then you can share it, and you could share it to a support team, for example, or I don't know, somebody in the business. And then that dashboard then has real meaning, because it's got data or reports on it that are actually making use to the people that kind of in the business that want to see that data. So, for example, number of orders received, or number of orders for a specific product, or something like that. Or maybe a support team want to know how many failures that they're seeing, or if the call time to an API or a HTTP triggered logic app is degrading. So you can show that information, pin it to a dashboard, and have it refreshing so that anybody can go and see that data.
Yeah, and effectively, I mean, yeah, you get that for free, don't you? It's built in. It's not even. Yeah. It's not even like you've got to pay extra for that. It's just if you've captured the data in App Insights, obviously you pay for App Insights, but how you surface that data, how you dashboard it, you get that for free. So that's really powerful. But also, I mean, one of the other things here about workbooks, because again, dashboards and workbooks can look very similar to the untrained eye. But workbooks kind of, and I think you might have an example of this in the demo, Dave. But it's really the difference with workbooks is that they allow us to drill into specific things rather than looking at dashboards. But is there anything more you want to elaborate on with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can create custom visuals with workbooks, and you can make something really relevant. So the dashboard that contains the details about orders flowing through a system is useful. But what would be really useful is if a support team could say, what happened to order number 502? And then they just type in 502 into a UI, then it comes back and tells them what's happening. That's where the real power is. And then you could drill down into multiple levels of detail, depending on who the person is that wants to use the dashboard. And I think that's where the real power comes, because you can make something that is interactive. And that's really the key difference, I would say.
Yeah, and that's where workbooks come in, and we will look at one of those in the demo. Now, we've got a couple of slides for the demo. I just want to kind of there's a couple of things I just want to go through quite quickly. One of them is the business process tracking. Now, if you have a BizTalk estate, and you'll be quite familiar with BAM, the business activity monitoring, and there hasn't really been an equivalent feature to BAM in Azure integration services up until now, but that's under development. In other words, you can define your process, gather information at different stages, and put that together as a set of data in the way that, I mean, you can do this with application insights, but this just gives you another way of achieving that. Now, the business process tracking is currently in public preview, and currently it's limited to Logic Apps. So at the moment, you can't bring in things like API and Azure Function, but it would be amazing if you could. So is this something that Microsoft are going to do? Because, I mean, certainly it seems to me like that would be great to bring into it. Have you got any thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, this feature is in public preview, as you mentioned, and the key difference here is that the interface that allows you to get at the business data that you're interested in is done through a UI, where with App Insights you have to write custody queries, which are not difficult, and I think worth the effort to learn, but it does involve that investment. And the product group are working on this feature. I think if there are things that people want to see, please reach out either to the product group and contact them on X, or we'll reach out to Andrew or myself, and we can relay that to them.
Pass it on. Yeah, definitely. Okay, and the last thing, I think it's the last thing before we go into the demo, but it's about cost considerations. So there's a few things here, and these are quite, I'm going to list some off, and then we can just talk about them, because you can validate that you need your traces table, because and that actually when you're logging information up Insights, you can just exclude particular tables if you don't need them, because obviously you get charged for all the stuff you log, and so you can just if there's pieces of data you just don't need, you can exclude them. You can use sampling. We mentioned that before, but if you've got 1 million things a day, you might just only want to sample 1% of them, and that will actually give you a decent picture. You can actually set a cap on your App Insights workspaces, so you can't go over a certain amount of charge per day. And then there's adaptive sampling. So, Dave, have you got any? There's a big long laundry list there. Do you want to pick out some highlights of that and then dive into those a little bit more?
Yeah, as we said earlier on, some of the tables like traces, there's quite a bit of data that goes in there from Logic Apps and functions. So you could turn on sampling to reduce what's going into that table, which is going to reduce cost. And the two things that really affect cost is how long you keep that data for, and you get a certain period of data for free, or a time period for free. After that, you have to pay, and the amount of data that you ingest. So really think about whether or not you need all of that data all of the time being written to App Insights. And as I mentioned, you can set sampling at different levels throughout your integration through different Logic Apps, different functions, etc., which I think is really valuable. And actually, quite a few customers don't do this, and I think it's really important that's at least reviewed to make sure that data that's being logged is what you want. So you can have a daily cap as well, which you can configure on the Log Analytics workspace that the App Insights instance is part of, so that you can then say, within a specific day, I want no more than this amount to be written. And when it starts hitting that limit, no more data is logged. Now, that may be what you want, it may not, but it's worth knowing that capability is there. And also adaptive sampling is where the platform itself is looking at the maximum. There's a configuration item that you can set that will be the maximum amount of calls that you can make. And what the adaptive sampling does is it starts introducing sampling dynamically based on where you are in relation to that cap. And I'm pretty sure that's enabled by default. So that can be useful as well. But again, you just need to think about whether that is appropriate for your scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for that, Dave. Okay, so let's get on to the demo, because that's what everyone's been waiting for, is the demo of all this stuff. So just setting the scene a little bit, we've got a lot to go through here. We're going to look at the track properties. We're going to look at application maps in App Insights. We're going to look at testing for availability. We're going to look at querying the logs. We're going to look at dashboards. We're going to look at workbooks. We're going to look at the whole lot. So, Dave, I actually can't see your screen ready to put that on. Do you want to? Would you like to share that, and then we can crack on with the demo?
Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah. What I might do actually is just full screen this, and then that'll give people a better chance to read it.
Sure. Okay. So the first thing is track properties, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a Logic app that is actually called from API management. So I've got a demo set up that is API management that calls my Logic app. The Logic app talks to SQL, drops a message onto a service bus queue. That's then picked up by an Azure function, which does some stuff, which is then written onto a queue, which is picked up by another function, which is written onto queue and picked up by a final function. And the idea is to show how you would go about tracking something that does have a number of different components. So this is the Logic app, which is my my kind of order process, if you like. And so the thing that Andrew mentioned earlier around using the compose action, that's exactly what I'm doing here. So I've created a compose action, and if we go to settings, we can see here that I've created an order details item, and actually, Andrew, can you go on mute?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. And so what I'm doing here is that I'm tracking the action outputs. So what I get written into App Insights is the content of the all of the data that I've written in my compose action. I'm also pulling the order ID from the trigger body, and as I mentioned, the track properties, they can access the body of the trigger, and they can access the inputs and outputs. And you just do that by using this @action outputs, or if you wanted the inputs, and you could put dot here, dot notation for one of the fields if you wanted to further drill down into that. So that's track properties, and what they are going to do now is to log that into the application insights telemetry. So if we go and take a look at, this is the App Insights instance that I have enabled for API management, for my Logic app, and my function apps. And we can see here that already just on the kind of welcome screen here that we've got a number of failed requests, and I deliberately caused my Logic app to fail earlier. It's telling us about server response time, server request counts, and also availability. And we can see here that we've had a few dips, and that's, you can see that's kind of correlating to the failures that we had over here. And I've configured this using the availability test feature of App Insights, and I'll drill into that in a second.
I mean, that's really useful, because a lot of people, particularly when you get to supporting live stuff, availability is often what people are targeted on, isn't it? So actually having a ready measure of that is really valuable.
It is. In fact, let's what we do is we'll look at application maps, and maybe I'll jump into the availability test. So at runtime, if I just click update map components here, hopefully the demo gods are with me. There we go. Right, so what this is showing here is my API management instance. Here is my Logic app. Here is the queue. Here's my first function and a queue, and my second function and a queue, and my third function. And what this application map does is it's looking at the telemetry that I've logged from all of those services, and it's building a visual view that's telling me how my applications are talking to each other. And the reason we've got this stuff over on the left here is this is actually my availability test that I've configured. So that's running every minute, and it's hitting my API management instance. And you can see here that some of it's green, some of it's red, and I can click on view details on a specific node. And we can see that there have been some failures, so I can click investigate failures here, and it's telling me some useful information here, but I can click on one of these, and it's now giving me some more details of when those issues have occurred, but it's suggesting one for me to go and look at. And what we see here is a call stack. So this is really useful in production, because I can see that my availability test called API management called my Logic app. These actions ran, and it got to the execute query action, and that failed. And we can see not found. So I've modified the query to call a stored procedure that's non-existent. But this is particularly useful if you're having errors in production, to be able to go and see exactly where the issue occurred. And if it had failed in a function, then I would have seen that down here. And remember, these things are chained together. This isn't just one Logic app, it's a Logic app with API with functions, etc. And what is really important is that you're able to see the end-to-end view of that. So that's application map. I mentioned about the availability testing, and conscious of time here, but I've got two tests here. This one here is, it can be created automatically in API management. When you configure App Insights, there's a box you can tick. And what App Insights will do is it will ping the availability endpoint of API management and record that in here. Now, all that's doing is telling you if API management is up and running or not. It doesn't say anything about whether or not the APIs themselves are working. And that's what this custom test here does. And what I've configured, and there's a little bit of code to write for this, not loads, but I've configured an Azure function that runs every minute, and it calls my Logic app. Now you can create tests in here, but they can only hit public HTTP endpoints. Whereas what you might want to do is to drop a message onto a queue, for example, to start your test. You might want to call a private endpoint. You might want to use managed identity, or a different type of security. And that's where these are really handy, because you can configure them to go and hit your endpoint in a way that really means something by passing relevant data to it, but also honoring any security that is configured for that app. And I can do the same thing here, so I can click on failed.
But this is almost like putting synthetic transactions through your live system, so that you actually, so that you're actually testing what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly that.
Yeah, and because you can do this, because you can set this to work all the time. I mean, particularly if you've got really important APIs that are called sporadically, not called all the time, you can still know that they're available, so that when they are really needed, you've actually got the status of their health.
Exactly, and you can see that you get the same call stack trace that we had before. And in this case, I actually configured service bus to send to a queue that didn't exist, and so you can kind of navigate down to there and see that that's failed. So that's availability, which I think is really important. We can go. We've looked at failures, but we can click on failures here, and we can go through and kind of do the same kind of thing. We can see performance, and we can see how our services are performing, and kind of drill down into kind of narrower time periods here. So that's kind of the stuff you get out of the box in terms of visuals in application insights. But what we can also do is create our own custom logs, and I think I've got some here. So all of the requests go to a table called requests, and here they are. You can see them all. You can see my API management call here, my Logic App actions, and there's a bunch of different data that you get associated with these. And if I'm using track properties, then if I drill into this, I should be able to navigate down to my track properties, and here's my order ID. Here are my order details. Remember the payload that I created. Here it is, available to me right in App Insights. I could also look at the exceptions table, which is where those failures were being written. And again, App Insights, when you use the UI, is using all of this data. The availability results are written in here as well. And so I could just take a look at those in here if I wanted to. I could also do things like looking at failures that have occurred, and I can render that as a pie chart. I can see that I've had more failures than successes recently, so I might want to take a look at that. And then we've been talking a lot about tracking business data, and that's what this is doing. So in my fictitious ordering process, where I'm sending orders into API management into my Logic app, and it's going through a fulfillment process, I can do things like pulling out the product name, which I'm actually doing in this case from the request body. I could also drill into some quite useful data. So by running this query, we can now see that I've pulled out the customer name, the product name, their order ID, the order quantity. I've got the stock level. Now, the stock level was actually returned by one of my other Logic apps. It's actually another workflow that I've called, but I'm logging that here because that could be useful. If we ended up with no stock returned, for example, maybe we'd like to generate some kind of alert. I've got the order, the time the order was received, but crucially, the time it was completed. Now, this is when the final function app in that chain completed. So I've been able to pull out these really useful pieces of data, because when the order was received, that was at APIM. This is the final function app. And then what I've also done is pulled out a delivery ID and a delivery date from that function app. So that final function app that's dealing with delivery is just tracking that data in a couple of lines of code. I'm also pulling out the operation ID, which is the thing we use to correlate, also the Logic App run ID. So I could go and paste that into the run history, and I could go to that directly to that Logic App. The other thing that I think is quite useful is if we look at this one. What this is doing is it's trying to understand the time that has been taken for that business process. So from the time that the order was received to now, if the order hasn't completed, how long has it taken? Because then what I can do is I can create an alert that would allow me to say, if an order takes more than 10 minutes, for example, generate an alert. So that's what this query is doing. It's just pulling back some the total time that the order's taken to run. So earlier we mentioned about workbooks and dashboards. So what I might want to do, if I click Pin Azure Dashboard, I can just go and pick my dashboard here that I'm interested in. I've got quite a few here. But if I jump here, this is my orders dashboard. If I click Pin, it would just turn up on here just like this. And so this is why order dashboards are really useful, because you can see here some useful information about the number of the number of calls that are complete, the products, the failures I've had, and this one is actually showing who's making the call in the first place. So who is it that has actually had the subscription to API management? So that's quite useful. So that's what dashboards. But the final thing that we can take a look at, and I was just refreshing there, are workbooks. So if I click on workbooks here, here's one I spent some time creating. And what this is doing is this custom visual is allowing a support person to see what's going on. It's showing all of the orders, the product, the customer name, when it was received, if it's completed, the delivery date, delivery ID, also the run ID. And in fact, I could just copy that run ID. I could jump to my Logic app here. I can type that in there. I can click go, and hopefully that's going to load up the run history for that particular Logic app. So that's useful. But what I can do is I can actually create another visual. So when I click on one of these, it'll drill down, and it will drill down into more detail. And this is showing me the kind of journey that my process has taken. Now, these are just custom queries that you can write, and they can do anything you want. So in this case, I've got some business data mostly, but I'm also then allowing a support person to drill into this detail. What I can also do is I can search on a specific order ID. So if I do that, then I will now find an order ID. Now I could search on delivery ID, I could search on anything I like. And if a customer is phoning up saying, hey, I haven't received my order, and I can just type it in here and then easily get at the data that I want. So the final thing to show you are alerts. And I created an alert earlier. And you can see here, quite a few have fired because I've got my process running every minute. So I've actually fixed it now, so it's not failing. But if we click on alert rules, I've created this alert called alert on orders delayed. And if we click edit and we click condition, here is the query, which is actually the same query that you saw earlier. All it's doing is pulling back any orders that haven't completed in a 60-second time period. Now, obviously, in real life, it would be longer than that, but you get the idea. And once I've created this alert, I can click actions. I can create what's called an action group. And from here, I can send emails, which is what I've done here, but I can do something a bit more interesting where I could call an Azure function, I could call a Logic app, I could call an automation runbook. So if I wanted to automate some kind of action when the alert fires, I can do that right from here. And the alert itself kind of looks
this is
a
where,
bit like...
as well, it's, you could be raising a ticket with your service desk or something like that. And that's where you can either do that via a Logic app or you could do that via a webhook. But those, but so very powerful in terms of what you can, what you can do next.
Yeah, and I can kind of click on that and it will take me directly to the query that raised the alert. I don't know if it will actually show up here because it happened a bit earlier, but you get the idea. You can kind of drill into that. Yeah, there we go. So these are the two that generated that alert. So yeah, make use of alerts. I think that's it for the demo. If we could just see the slides, make sure that I went through everything. I went through it incredibly quickly.
I'll go back to that. So we've got, so here's what we were going to go through, Dave. We're going to go through track properties, the application map, availability, queries, dashboards, workbooks. And so I think we covered all that off. I mean, this is a deep thing, and there's a lot of power in here. So but by all means, you can reach out to me, reach out to Dave if you want to. If you want to know more about this, by all means, get in touch. Because there's so much possibility, and we've tried to give you a really good paint the picture of what's possible. But there's always what is it in your particular case that makes sense to you. So okay, I'm again conscious of time, but we just move to sort of wrap up now. Really, the main takeaways are obviously there's amazing capabilities in Azure for supporting your integrations. But as you've seen from that demo that Dave, there's so many possibilities, not just for technical support but also for business support. And getting that all working together, you can achieve something really powerful. But so many of the capabilities, almost like you get them for free, but a lot of people are underusing them. So, please just look at this and really get to grips with it. And as long as you capture the diagnostics and the relevant business data, so those things that like the line of code in your function app or that, or the compose shape in your Logic app to actually log those things. Once we've captured all that data, we can build the dashboards, the workbooks, the alerts. We can build that up afterwards. It's great to know that up front so that you can design in the data, but then as you learn more about your system, you can still build that up. So all is not lost if you haven't put that up front. So on that note, one of the things, if you go back to Slido, please please let us know what your thoughts are about if you could sum up the webinar in 1 or 2 words, that would be brilliant.
capture the data. That's a really good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. Okay, great stuff. What we'll do is I think we've got some questions in the Q&A, and I appreciate we are kind of at time now. So if you've got to run, thank you so much. But we'll just spend a little bit of time. Let's just see what we've got in the in the questions, and I'll let you keep adding the to the word cloud. So we've got a couple of questions from Craig. Craig, lovely to have you on the webinar. So there's a link to the information on App Insights sampling. So Dave, have you got anything there that's to hand?
Yep, I'll paste that in.
And then and then there's also links for and there's also, Craig's also asked about business process tracking. Now I'm going to dig out some, there's the videos from Kent which we can share, but if you've got any other links, Dave, then by all means post those. And then we've got Mustafa, who said, is there any external tool you're using or recommending for monitoring AS components other than Turbo 360? So have you got any thoughts on that, Dave, before I jump in?
Yeah, I think that some of the partners do have tools that that they've built, which is their IP, which obviously people can look at. I'm more really focused on the things that we have out of the box, and I think it's probably worth reviewing these things and looking at these different services that exist out there. But also don't lose sight of a lot of this is built in, and also I think the business process tracking that the Logic Apps product team are working on, I think is really, really interesting and going in some some interesting directions. So I guess that's my summary. Kind of don't forget that Azure has a lot of this stuff already built in.
Yeah, and because that's what I was going to say, really, because as a for us being a solutions partner building on this platform, I mean, where we would go first is we would say, have you used the built-in Azure stuff to its full potential? And if you've used it as much as you can and you're still stuck, then we can look at tools. But actually, I haven't actually come across many scenarios where you actually need more than that. As long as all the caveats there of capturing the right data, and then building the dashboards, the workbooks, the queries, the alerts. That actually, that is all that stuff's in there for free, and that is enough for almost everyone. Most people, it's just almost like a skills gap of not using it. So I think this, by all means, get in touch. And certainly we can have a conversation about that, about what you want to do. But just use the platform as much as you can. Right. Okay. I think we are on time now. So let's wrap up there. So thank you so much for your attention today. Really, really glad to have so many of you attending the webinar and for taking part in the Slido and the word clouds. That's great feedback, and we'd love to have you back on the next webinar. So thank you so much. In the meantime, if you want anything, reach out to me or Dave. We're easy to find on LinkedIn if you haven't got our contact details, and we can always chat about any of the things that are in here. So thanks a lot, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody.